The Keto Lifestyle Podcast. How are you, Jessyca?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on. It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you too. I was excited to have you on and get to talk to you again after meeting you for the first time on the keto, low carb cruise. Sorry, it's actually called low carb cruise. After your talk on the cruise, I just was like, man, this message, I know you're doing a really good job of getting it out on your own, and other people are supporting that and do it. You know, you've been on podcasts and things like this, but I just thought, man, my listeners have to hear this. Any platform I can give her, that people need to hear this. It's a huge message. But before we get into kind of your specialty, so to speak, can you tell the viewers and the listeners a little bit about you and like how you got into this space?
Hey, sorry, the internet's a little glitchy.
That's okay.
Okay, you said,
Like,
can you tell them
how you got into this space and tell them a little bit about you and how kind of how you got started in this?
Yeah, definitely something I never expected to be in. Never thought I would be the voice of keto for mental health and for eating disorders, but I think that it's so important that that group of people who struggle with both those things, understand that there's hope and there's a way to treat their illness that they probably haven't considered. And for me, that's the whole thing. When I started to share my story, and it did happen a little bit at a time, but I remember when I started to get better after I had been keto for several months, and I was starting to feel better, and I was starting to have physical, mental, all kinds of results. I hesitated to share. I remember I felt ashamed because, you know, both subjects are things people don't talk about, mental health issues and eating disorders. And I decided that it was worth the embarrassment or potential embarrassment to let someone else know they can be healed. I was sick for so long, and I literally thought there was no way out. You know, it's the person who's given that sentence of, you know, you've got this illness and you will always have it, and it's progressive, and there really isn't any great way to treat it. That's how I felt. I had just accepted that. And so for me, it was a great miracle to discover that changing my eating would absolutely change my life and cause me to be in recovery. So that helped me overcome the embarrassment of that because I really was. I was like, oh no. And it wasn't even fear of what strangers would think. It was fear of people that knew me. People who for me, they probably thought I had it all together during certain times of my life, because I tended to like retreat from the world when I didn't have it all together. I only exposed the version of me that I found acceptable. And so it was terrifying to hit post on that first post where I knew that people that I knew would see it, and then they would know me, the real me, the messed up, the disordered me. But I did it, and instead of it being a nightmare, it felt like a huge relief. I think a lot of people who have eating disorders and a lot of people who have mental health issues, we hide that because we're ashamed. And so we always kind of feel like a fraud. We know that other people don't think the way we do or act the way we do about food and other things. And so we tend to try to fit in. We tend to even overcompensate and be a big personality. And then you go home and you're exhausted, and then you give in and you indulge in your illness. So it's more of a shock sometimes when people who are outgoing or who have been successful or who everybody knows or thinks is happy comes out and tells the story. But yeah, that's really, it happened that way. And every opportunity I've been given to share the story has just been a divine appointment for me. Mm-hmm. It gets noticed by people who need to hear it and people who want to share it with people who need to hear it. I've never really sought to put it out there. But I'm so grateful that I've had these chances to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 3.5 years, a little over 3.5 years in recovery from bulimia, anorexia, compulsive overeating. I am off meds for depression, anxiety, mood disorder, insomnia, bladder disease, and migraine. I was taking about 17 pills a day before I started the ketogenic lifestyle. So it isn't just one thing, it's everything.
Wow, that's amazing. So one of the things I want to go back to really quick is you had mentioned that you had mentioned the shame that comes with coming out about this, and that you don't have it all together. And I think that's a huge point. I definitely can align with that and understand that personally. But I wonder if sometimes it's like then you were saying that you didn't want people to know that maybe you act like you're happy, you overcompensate, and then you knew that if you came out, then they would think that you weren't happy, or they would know that you weren't happy. And I think that I definitely that resonates with me. And I think it's also the feeling of, if you come out, maybe you are happy in your life and you just have this thing that you feel like is out of control, and you feel like, if I expose this and people know that I have this disordered eating, then they're going to think that everything else in my life is a mess and that I'm not happy and I don't have, where maybe you are, but it's just that one thing that you can't get under control, and it makes you feel like you're out of control. Did you feel that way?
Well, I think that for me, it eroded into the place where my whole life was out of control. So I had incredible opportunities with my work life, with my career. I worked for a company that valued me and constantly promoted me and moved me around, and I got to teach and coach and train and be an influencer there. But behind closed doors, and I love that. I was not miserable when I was on the job, but I was traveling, and behind closed doors, I was binging like crazy and purging or taking laxatives or starving. And I know that would have been such a great shock to them. So I felt constantly conflicted about who I really was. And I think keeping up that sort of role, even though it really was part of me, it was keeping up that duplicitous thing that really did wear me out. And over time, my whole life did become a wreck. So for some time, I was struggling with the eating disorder. I was struggling with mental illness, but it was mine. It was a separate box. And after not getting well, I mean, we're talking about 31 years of bulimia and being able to function with it and hide it. And then it literally got to the point, it's progressive. It got to the point where my life was a disaster. I even withdrew from social media. I left my job, got off social media. I was at a place where I was just existing. I was not participating in life. The only thing I did do was eat. And I didn't leave the house. And I share that because there are people that struggle with all different kinds of things. But I got to the point where I felt I was completely unacceptable to go outside. I was actually diagnosed at that time with agoraphobia, which is not fear of being around people. It's fear of going outside into the world. And I would go months and months and months. So I really did. At one time, it was a secret, and I didn't want to share that I had a flaw, or I didn't want to share that. I felt like it would make people think less of me. And they would see me in a different light. And I knew I was really good at what I did. And I didn't want that to be, influence the way they thought of me. So I kept it a secret then. But by the time I actually just crashed and burned and withdrew from life, my life truly was in every area a wreck. So I guess like I said, it's progressive. Eating disorders they always get worse if you don't find some freedom or stay in treatment.
So what was it? Where was the moment for you when you were like, this is it? Where was your rock bottom? What was it that you knew something had to change?
Well, I talk about food sobriety, and a lot of people try that with other types of sobriety. It's a little bit different for us. for a lot of reasons. But I thought, I mean, I had gone to 12-step programs for eating and things like that. I always still relapsed, always. So there were many times where I thought I was at rock bottom, almost dying, not rock bottom. Being in the hospital, not rock bottom, you know, nothing was rock bottom. And in fact, every time I thought it was, I still relapsed. So it wasn't a true bottom of the bottom. So I was 41 years old. I had not driven a car for 5 years because I didn't like to go outside. I had severe anxiety. I was on all these meds. I was up to 309 pounds, by far the highest I'd ever been, because I was just binge eating. It's the only thing I had that gave me any pleasure was just binge eating. And so I literally was in a place where I was like, I don't care if I die. And I meant that when I would say that and when I would think that. I was not suicidal at that time, but I have struggled with that in the past. I just was apathetic. I almost wish something would happen. Like, I know it sounds terrible, but I would wish, I'm like, you know what? If someone said you had a terminal illness, I would be like, good, I can be out of my misery. And I really, really believed that when I had those thoughts. But I got to the point that physically I was having symptoms that my husband was really concerned about. I would wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air. My chest was so heavy, it was crushing me. And it happened like multiple times a night. And I've never had trouble with that. It's literally my body weight was crushing my chest. And so that was scary for him, scary for me, although I wasn't as alarmed as I should have been. And then things got worse. And I don't know what medical condition caused this. I suspect there could have been an issue with sugar. But I stayed away from the doctor for a couple of years because I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to be chastised about my weight. I just didn't. But I started to black out. I would stand up, I would black out. I would just quick blackouts and then come back. And to this day, I don't know what caused that, but my husband at least convinced me to go get my blood pressure checked. And when he did that, I, reluctantly did it. And there was a technician person there. I think she was really a pharmacist. I'm not sure. But anyway, she looked at it and she was like, this is really, really bad. I remember looking down and there was a chart that showed you the different, I guess I didn't know that much about blood pressure at the time, but there was a chart that showed you where you are. And I looked at my numbers and I looked at the chart and it was way up at the top in that hypertension, serious risk for stroke. And right in that moment, I started to care. It's like when I was faced with the fact that I really could have a stroke, all of a sudden, it's like it wasn't real till I saw that number. All of a sudden I thought, if I have a stroke, if I die, I'm not going to see my older daughter get married. I'm not going to see my little girl, through school. I just suddenly started thinking about all these things I would miss. Up to that point, I believed the lie that I was such a burden for everyone that they might miss me. I didn't believe they wouldn't miss me, but I thought they'd probably be better off. In that moment, I realized I don't want to miss these things. So all of a sudden, I went from not caring if I died to wanting to live. So that was my moment. It literally was that, and it was unexpected. It wasn't the fact that my weight was that high. It wasn't the fact that I was on all these pills. It was literally facing the fact that I could have a stroke and die. Like, the conditions are already there and it could happen any minute. And then I just decided, no, that's not what I want. I don't want to miss these things.
Wow. And so many questions. I have so many questions surrounding that. That must have been a horrifically scary moment, like to come face to face with that. And especially when you're involving the thoughts of with your children and, you know, you're like, oh my gosh, like this could be real. This could really happen. I could really miss all of this. So you get to that point, and this was the moment that you're like, okay, I'm going to turn things around. Before we move forward on this, my thoughts, I guess, are, do you know what caused you, or are there things that you feel like caused you, or maybe are kind of things that are maybe kind of universal for people in general that kind of led you down this road to begin with, that had you in the grips of this for 31 years?
I think that the fact that people don't talk about it much, you think you're the only one. I often share the story that when I was 11, I struggled with food since age 4. It's that's actually documented. My mom took me to a child psychologist, and that was his analysis of me, that I was obsessed with food at age 4. So, you know, there is a lot of conversation about where and how eating disorders start. But for me, I just always had it, as far as I know. But at age 11, I thought I invented bulimia. I thought I have found this thing that makes me feel good, that makes me not get, and I enjoyed it. And I literally, for several years, thought I was the only person in the world that engaged in that behavior. That's how lonely of a thing that bulimia is.
So what was it about bulimia
And
that made you enjoy it? Was it the feeling that you had control over something in your life? Did you at that time feel out of control about food already? Did you feel like you ate more than you saw other people eat? I mean, what was it about doing that you enjoyed?
This is the odd part, because most people are like, throwing up, how is that enjoyable? It wasn't that as much as I realize now what it was. I don't know what I thought at the time, but I realize now it was that if I had a strong emotion, or if I had moments of low self-esteem, or if I didn't feel good enough, or if I was stressed out, I would feel that feeling rising up in me, and I would binge to push it down. And that felt better. But then when I would actually purge and release it, it was almost like I got rid of the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that now that was part of the addiction of it. It became less about like how my body looked or anything like that, and more about the relief that I felt to release an emotion that I had. It's like it's rising up, and then I push it down, and then it's released, and I got relief for a little while from what I felt. And I think that part of it, that psychological addiction, was stronger than the physical addiction to doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing people don't realize much. They think it's about how you feel about your body.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. There's a psychological addiction. But even when I was found out and my parents tried to find me help, there weren't places for eating disorders for many, many years. There weren't people that specialized in it. There weren't people that talked about it. I never heard of anybody else that had one except for Karen Carpenter. And she's like the first person anybody heard of that had anorexia. And so it makes you feel even more ashamed and alone. And I think that most people, they develop that psychological addiction, the physical addiction to food, but then the shame keeps you quiet about it, because you really can't imagine anyone else doing the things you do. I literally would say, I am the sickest person in the world. I would say that to myself. Like, there's no way that anyone else is sicker than this. If anybody knew this side of me, they would be so disgusted and they would lose all respect for me. And so you don't talk about it. You just don't. And you keep it secret. And I think that's part of why it keeps its hold on you. And I was in and out of hospitals for many years, in and out of different programs. My parents, they really did try it, and they were supportive. But looking back, I know I went to those things to appease them, not because I really wanted to get well.
Mm-hmm.
I identify myself as my sickness. I think sometimes the the 12-step programs played into that. Like, you kind of go in and you say, this is what I am.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no hope, but I give it to God. And so obviously there's elements of that I love, but I actually claimed that as my identity. Like, I am Jessyca and I have an eating disorder, and without it, I'm nothing and I am no one.
Mm.
And so I wasn't willing to give it up and didn't want to. I only went into the hospital when things got really, really bad and other people begged me to. And that's why it didn't work. It literally took till I was 41. And it was that moment of, whoa, I really am going to miss out on life. And I'm going to miss out on the lives of my children. And, you know, my life really, it wasn't like my past life flashed before my eyes. It was my future life. And so again, I think the secrecy of it and feeling like that we're alone is what keeps people in the grips of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then not to let go of it, because it is a way to soothe. It is a way to deal with emotions that you do in private, and then you can present yourself to others as if you have it all together, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, I've struggled with similar things in the past. And I think that for me, that's definitely been the case. Is if you can do this stuff in private, then you don't have to let anybody else see that. And then you can be who you think you need to be in public.
Or who you think people need you to be. Yes,
exactly. That's right. Like, that's a great way to put it. That's exactly right. And I think that, I had another thought when you were talking that I should be writing this down. I'm trying to write it down, but I'm so interested in what you're saying that I keep forgetting to write things down. But okay, so you get to this point. What is it about keto, or how did you hear about keto? Like, how did that come into play? How did that seem to be the answer for you?
Right. It wasn't like someone came to me and said, guess what? A ketogenic diet can help with your eating disorder.
Right.
Nobody was saying that. And I know keto is big right now, and the message is spreading that it helps with lots of different things, but I never heard of that, and I never heard anyone say it. And I'm not sure that they did. I didn't understand that changing my food in this way would also put me in recovery. So I started not knowing. I started it because I knew that in the past I had done low carb diets and lost weight. With my anorexia, bulimia, compulsive overeating, I had been 115 at one point, and then I was up to 309. So I had these huge swings, and I had really done every diet.
Wow.
And so I had done Atkins like in the late 90s, early 2000s. Mike and I were fairly successful with that. I remember I had lost 80 pounds and we stuck with it for a long time, but I still binged and purged. And so I assumed that starting this low carb diet, I didn't really understand what was different about keto. I assumed that it would be similar, that I would get the weight off, but I would continue to have my eating disorder. After all, I thought it was me. You know, I thought this disorder is literally ingrained in me. It cannot be separated or removed. And so what was interesting was, so I started, and like I said, I'd been off of social media. My husband was looking at pages for me to have support in low carb living, and Ketogenic Success came up. That's Brian's page, who I now work for. And at that time it was a smaller group, but he added me to it. I get back on social media just for that reason, just so I can get low carb recipes, just so I can find some support. And so I kind of focused in on that group, and other ones I just didn't even pay attention to. I'm not sure why, maybe because it was nothing new. But in this group, it seemed different. People were talking about reversing their diabetes, and they looked drastically younger. And, you know, there was so much inspiration. And I was eating low carb, or what I knew of low carb, and I realized that keto, a ketogenic lifestyle, is very different. It's also high fat. It's not as much meat. So I knew the low carb part, but that part was bizarre to me. So I realized, man, I'm eating a ton of meat. What would happen if I trust this because I'm seeing other people be able to do this. Again, at that time, it wasn't a ton, but it was enough that it was really like, okay, this is different. I'll try it. And you're probably the same. We grew up in the low fat era.
Yeah.
Like 20 grams of fat. I remember I was like in my 20s, religiously under 20 grams of fat a day, which, thinking about the mental illnesses that I had at that time and struggle with, it's no wonder my brain was like fat starved.
Oh, I often think back about that, and I'm like, I am actually very grateful and blessed that way worse things didn't happen to me.
Exactly. Because I mean, your brain being fat starved, I didn't know that at the time, and I didn't know it even when I started keto. But that was a huge part of what played into all of the other issues I had: the anxiety, depression, mood disorder, insomnia. All of it was about my brain. I had also been a vegetarian in the past, and I did a ton of like the soy products, the Morningstar Farms and all that. And I think about like how those things now, I know it affects your hormones. I look back at those 30 years, 3 decades of sickness, and I thought, well, I had the sickness, but if there's things that I could do to make it worse, I did them all. So keto was kind of the opposite of that, and it was very hard for me to add fat to things at first. And that is something that I hear from people who struggle with eating disorders. Like, it's in their head, like, if I add fat, I'm going to get fat. And that took a leap of faith, and it took trusting in what I was seeing other people doing. And that is actually when things started to change beyond my weight. I was losing weight, eating low carb, higher protein. But for me, when I cut the protein and added the higher fat, my brain started operating in a way that it never has. My biggest, greatest fantasy was that I could get back to what I was at some point, that I could think clearly again. I do have to mention this because I'm talking about mental illness. It's drastic. I had electric shock therapy. I was on so many meds, and I had been on them for so long. Really, I mean, the first meds I was on was Prozac in my teens, and it just built up. And I don't think there's anything I didn't try. So I was desperate. There was a point where I was super, super desperate, and I would do anything, and that was suggested to me as really my only course of action, and it fried my brain. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. Big memory gaps. I remember having trouble writing my name. I would get confused about the year. That's when I stopped driving. So when I say my biggest dream was to get back, I just wanted to be able to think again, because my brain was completely messed up. It was literally injured from those treatments. And so what I was feeling, what I started to feel with the high fat on keto, was a clearing. And it wasn't like I was getting back to how I was before. It was a whole new thing. It's almost like different parts of my brain lit up. You know, those memories are gone. I've gone through the stages of grief, you know, of the fact that they aren't coming back. But it's almost like these other parts of my brain that I had never really activated lit up. And I started to feel different, and I had a different kind of energy than I'd ever had. And I was like, this is so different. And that really, my own personal experience led me down the road of research. I became obsessed with finding out why. Like what is it about this? I wasn't paying attention to the bulimia, but I suddenly realized it had been 2 months and I hadn't binged and purged. Like it's almost like it slid into the background because I was feeling so good, and I was focused on, and I was in the group a lot, and I was messaging, and I was reading, and I was like, why is this working? And then like, oh my God, I have not binged or purged in 2 months. And there was that little bit of fear that rose up in me, like, well, you can expect that to end anytime. But I was really determined to keep working on this and working through it. And I think the more my brain cleared, the high fat content being very, very good for my brain, the more I was able to work through my issues with eating disorders. It wasn't that the keto cured the eating disorder. It did take away the physical craving, and it did clear my brain and opened me up to be able to see things in a way that I never had. I mean, I had tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of therapy, but I never could apply it to me. It just sounded like they were talking about someone else. And I would think, you don't get it. I can't do that. But when my brain on keto was able to heal, and I was able to work through all the issues that had caused me to be sick. And now it's been over 3.5 years, and I feel better than I have my entire life. I'm 45 years old now, and I feel better than I did in my 20s.
Amen.
I'm like, this is the best time of my life. If somebody's like, somebody would ask that question, what is the best time that you ever had in your life? I'm like, now. That's a miracle to come from where I've been. And I am so grateful for that.
That's awesome. So there's, again, so much in what you're talking about that I am sure is resonating with so many people. And I'm hoping that people are listening to this or watching this and they're starting to feel some hope and like, wow, this can happen for me. But for someone that's listening or watching this and having those feelings like you were, where they're like, well, okay, that's great for her. I'm so glad that Jessyca was able to heal her brain and all this worked out. But I've never been able to stick to anything.
Yeah.
And I always get on some new eating plan and I can't stick to it. How would you help somebody, or how would you tell somebody, what are some steps, or do you have like some tips or things that you could say, listen, just try this, or do these types of things? What are some things that you tell people?
Well, I was that person, first of all, that said, there's no diet that's ever going to help me. I mean, I almost was cocky about the fact that I know everything about my eating disorder and there is no cure. This is who I am. I was firmly planted in it. So it was a great shock to me that this worked. And I will tell those of you who maybe think, well, I'm still hopeless, that now over the last 2.5, 3 years, I have helped tons and tons and tons of other people get free. So it isn't just me. We run some eating disorder groups in Individualized, and of course I work one-on-one with people, but it isn't just me. If it was just me, I'd be like, yeah, you know what? Maybe this was just the right thing for my brain. But so many people say, if I had not found keto, I would not be free today. And I have clients that have 2 years of sobriety now, food sobriety, I mean, not engaging in their addiction. And that gives me proof that it will work. But I also would say this. So first of all, you got to take a little bit of a leap of faith and say, if this is working for other people and I haven't tried it, it might be worth trying. The second thing I'll tell you is what keto did for me was it gave me freedom from numbers obsession. Now, in the keto world, one of the probably the most used word is macros. and I made the decision in my keto journey not to track. I had always tracked everything, like calories, except for when I was binging, I didn't track, but I'm really curious about how many calories some of those things were. But I always did. I tracked fat grams, I tracked calories, I did, I had all the apps. Letting that go and allowing myself to eat as much as I needed to feel full, and that was a lot at first, was a relief to me. So I think the first step is realizing, put all the diets you've ever been on away. This is not the same thing. Yes, you're detoxing your body from stuff that isn't good for it. I'm not eating inflammatory food, so that that brings me to a good place. I start to feel better. I have less pain. Went down a shoe size. Anti-inflammatory feels good, so you start to feel like doing more. But in reality, this idea that I don't have to stick to some specific meal plan, I don't have to write every single thing down, I don't have to track everything that goes in my mouth, was incredibly freeing in the experience. Mm-hmm. For me, I wound up during my whole weight loss journey, I lost 135 pounds, and during my healing, I never tracked. And so that's a very attractive thing. I think most of us who have eating disorders are perfectionists. We are all or nothing. And so if we're tracking and we realize we went over in one thing, we're like, well, forget it. And we just do whatever we want to.
Right. And you just throw that whole day, that whole week, whatever
I'll start again tomorrow. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And so it kind of frees you from that perfectionism, because you're like, as long as I'm eating these things and not these things, I'm going to get better.
That's such a great way to look at it, Jessyca, because I think a lot of people, and I do typically when I work with people, I will have them track for some amount of time just to learn what's in their food, but I never have them start by tracking. And the reason why is exactly what you're saying. I think that it is so one of the beautiful things about keto, or I even tell people, if you don't want to be in ketosis, that's totally fine, but just
go low carb.
Yes, just low carb and teaching your body to use fat for fuel instead.
Yeah.
It's so freeing to just be like, you don't have to track all this stuff. Who cares if you're producing ketones at the moment? Just stop eating crap. If you feel good, and just look at all the amazing benefits, like you were saying, that fat has for our bodies and specifically our brain. So I think a lot of people, that's what's going to get people to stick around, I think, long term. So anyway, I love that.
Well, no, it's true. And really the question you're asking is, what incentive does someone have to try a ketogenic lifestyle when they have an eating disorder, or they have depression, or they have brain issues? And that is, what do you have to lose? Most of us have tried everything. I literally did every diet. I did HCG, I did Jenny Craig, I did Nutrisystem. I mean, I did all of them. And this was different. And I'm finding that it's working for other people too. But the freedom from that numbers of session is pretty huge. I do have some clients who track, and that's okay, because that's not their issue. And it can be a really good tool, but for those of us that are in that place, that extreme place of, I am hopeless, you're making a choice. I'm either going to say, well, there's a possibility I could get better on keto, or you can say, you're not going to stay the same. What you're really saying is, I'm going to get worse, and this is going to progress. And maybe your life isn't the wreck that mine was at that point, but it can be. I was never that person that thought that I would be homebound and not part of life, but it is progressive. Eventually it gets worse and worse. So you're not choosing to try something new or stay the same. You're choosing to try something new or get worse. I think that's it. Maybe you have been to that place where you just, I just accept this is what it is. I have an eating disorder. Maybe you're overweight and you're like, you know what? Maybe I'm just supposed to be overweight. And the problem with that is, because that's exactly what I did. I resigned. I stopped the fight. You miss the fact that it's going to get worse. And boy, does it. When you stop resisting it, when you stop trying things, it gets worse at an alarming rate. And that's what I experienced. So when you're making that choice, when you're thinking about whether you should try this, again, I think it's a step towards life, or it's a step towards death.
Yeah. And I often will tell kind of what I'll go over with clients is figuring out what your why is. Like, why are you doing this? Like you had some very big moments or a big moment where you were like, my children are my why. I mean, this is, and not only the children, but the fact that you don't want to miss this. Like, you really became your why. Like, I am the why. Like, I want to live. I want to experience life. I want to experience my children. And this is, it was almost sounds like it was a moment of realization for you that you were worthy. And that's amazing.
Before, when I had considered, and I did go through periods of time where I was suicidal, and that's a whole other story. But I went through periods of time like that. And I literally had gotten to the point where it was like, the only thing I could think about is how it would affect other people. If I died, if I went through with it, or if something happened to me, I would think, man, I know they'll be sad. I've lost people and it's been so painful, and I hate for them to go through that. But at the same time, I felt my presence in their life, as messed up as I am, is a greater burden than that grief would be. That's what I believe. But at no point before then did I actually think, what about me? I'm going to miss it. I want to be there for those things. It was always about how my sickness or removing myself from their lives would affect them versus I don't get to do these things. I don't get to see these things. I don't get to be part of these things. And that was the driving factor. I'm like, and I have to tell you, I dealt with a lot of guilt over things that I had missed. I dealt with a lot of guilt for the years that I was unstable, for the years that I didn't go to things, didn't participate in my children's lives, was not a good wife. How could I be?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't. I mean, it's terrible to say I wasn't a good mom. I was physically present, but that is all. And I certainly wasn't setting a good example. Clara was 4. Mike stayed home with her up until that point, and then that's when I stopped working, came and stayed home. And I didn't experience her school. I didn't experience her teachers. Like, he was the one that took care of everything. People didn't know me. If they saw me, they wouldn't know I was her mother. My older daughter, of course, she's in her 20s, so I experienced the guilt of knowing that she saw so many disordered things. I can remember her coming to visit me in the eating disorders hospital and stuff, and like breaks my heart. But I have such a terrific therapist. And he told me this, because I know that shame and guilt can drive you back to your illness. It really can. It can be a reason that you relapse. And I was struggling. And he said to me, is there any way to undo those years? And I was like, no, of course not. It doesn't take away the guilt, though. And he said, what would take away the guilt? I didn't know. He said, how about if you replace every single bad day, every disordered, dysfunctional, bad mom, bad wife day with an awesome new you day? And that was like this huge light bulb for me. So I'm like, okay, so how many years of Clara's life was I sick? All right, when I get to this many years sober, I'm going to have that many days, and that's what she's going to remember.
Yeah.
My older daughter, I mean, for 20 some years, that's going to take a lot of time, but I'm going to get there. I'm never giving up. But I think for her, what she gets to see is the comeback story of her lifetime. And I know that for her, that she will apply that to her life and understand that it's never too late and you're never too bad to get better. So I have the opportunity that inspires me. I can replace all the dysfunctional, disordered days with days that are healthy and healed. And that gave me drive, and it helped me just get rid of the guilt, because guilt keeps you sucked in and you feel like, well, there's nothing I can do. I can't undo it. But in a way I can replace those days. Here's an amazing day in place of this terrible day that you experienced.
That is I love that. That is such a beautiful way to look at it. And for any of us, whether it's people are watching this and maybe they don't have an eating disorder, but they just have a history of just diet after diet after diet and feeling like their life will be better. They can start living when they,
right.
Like when I get to that weight, when I get to that, whatever the benchmark is, then things will be good. And then it's almost like you're just like all those days you're just waiting to live, like just waiting to be you.
I think a bigger issue with that is, and I see this happen with clients, people with eating disorders and who don't, they think when they hit this number, this specific thing, that's when they'll start to feel good. That's when they'll start to feel worthy. That's when their self-esteem will be better. And I can tell you, having gone through bouts with anorexia, it's a lot like that. You think, I'm going to get to this number and then I'll think I look thin enough. Mm-hmm. Then I'll be good enough. Then I'll be small enough. And then you get to that number and you're like, what was I thinking? I'm not good enough. I still need this much. I still need to go. And I think that's what happens. People do get to their goal weight sometimes on a ketogenic diet, and they're like, now what? Maintenance is boring.
Mm-hmm.
So what I try to help people with transitioning is, what do you focus on next? You can take the lessons that you learned from overcoming your eating disorder and losing the weight and apply them to every single area of your life. So if the lesson is, no matter how long I identified as I am bulimic. It's who I am. I can change. So that means no matter how I've reacted to circumstances, I can change. No matter what my work ethic has been, I can change. No matter what my disposition is, if it doesn't serve me well today where I am, I can change. And I think that's what keeps me excited. At some point you hit your goal and you're like, okay, now what? It's this continuous pursuit, understanding that every part of you is capable of change. And that keeps it exciting. You're on this journey to what's next. Every day I wake up and I'm like, I wonder what's next.
This is where I think journaling comes in really handy too, because so much of who we are, who we think we are, is what we say to ourselves over and over. Like you saying, you know, you're like, I'm Jessyca and I'm bulimic, versus being able to turn those around and really speak into our lives who we want to be and what our goals are, as if we are that already. Like understanding that we can be that person, like you're saying, we can change, and saying, you know, I am whatever it is that you want to be, and really speaking that out loud, writing that down, reading that, believing that about yourself, maybe before you are even where you think that is going to happen, but just really trying to ingrain that into your spirit, like that you are that. Your cells hear that, they understand that, they believe that.
You have to reset daily rituals. If you're someone who gets up in the morning and your first thought is, oh, it's raining outside, or oh, I have so much to do today, and I think there's a lot of people like that. Even if it's not your natural thing, if you're not a writer, if you're not a journaler, I think the second that thought hits your head, you have to say, what if today is amazing? You know, so your brain attacks you with negative, and you have to come back with a positive, and it gets you up out of bed. So you wake up in your worry. What if this happens at work? And then I would say back to that, what if I have the best day at work? What if I accomplish something I never thought possible? There's an equal chance of it happening. Why do we go straight to that negative? But I think starting off with a daily intention, and a lot of my clients do message me and say, my intention is this today. And when they do that, they tend to stay with it because they said it to me. They wrote it down. They did it out loud. They didn't just think it. They took action on it. And so I think that's super, super helpful. Doing some sort of literal action, and in the morning is best, because what you think about what this day is going to be often manifests. Oh, this is going to be a lazy day. I don't feel like doing anything. You're probably not getting anything done. It's probably going to be a lazy day. But if you wake up and say, I want to be a positive influence on every single person I come across today, and that's what my job is today, you find opportunities to be that. So for me, that is what I say. I'm like I want to be a blessing. I want to be I want to make a difference in every person's life. I'm not just talking about clients, but if I'm at the bank, if I'm in line. And this is so opposite of depression, right? But it's what keeps me interested. I look for people who might need that interaction, and amazing things happen because I'm looking for them. They were always there. They always needed a smile or a positive word or something like that. I just never saw them. I was wrapped up. Now I see them, and that is the most fulfilling thing in the world, is to be able to look around and say, I'm going to make a difference for someone today. It doesn't have to be something huge. Right. And looking for those opportunities to do that is like really gets you up and going.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think that's a big part of what happens in your brain, like you were talking about. For me, I definitely felt different. Like my emotional health was better. And that makes me able to do those things for other people. Like I went from like not noticing people and really viewing people as almost like objects to noticing people and viewing them as people, and realizing that they have emotions and feelings and they're going through things in their lives too. And it changed my emotional health.
It does. And the other piece is this, when you are depressed, when you have an eating disorder, so many of your thoughts in the day are turned inward and are focused on that. When you experience freedom and the depression is lifted and you're not constantly thinking about your body and about food, you have all this free time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things people say in this world is, I don't have time. It's almost like you are gifted extra days in each day, because the amount of time you used to stress on things like that, it's gone. And then you start to see what your real purpose is. And I think all of our real purpose is to give to others, to breathe into them life. And that's just what I believe. And when you're doing that is when you are most fulfilled. Way more fulfilled than if you step on the scale and it says what you're hoping for. Breathing life into someone else, speaking the word in the moment when they need it is so much more fulfilling. And that's a great thing to focus on. That's real life, you know?
Yes, I totally agree with you. So before we wrap up this interview, I'm curious. So you said you don't track anything. Twofold question. Number one, do you test for ketones? Do you know if you're in ketosis? How does that look for you?
I didn't for the first 2 years. Then I went to the first KetoCon. Mojo was there, and my husband bought me one. And so I tested, and it was really cool because my ketones were really high. And I was like, yeah. And then I started to realize this numbers thing can be a problem. Mm-hmm. If you start to chase that number and then you start to be like, oh, it's good today, so I must have a lot of energy. What if you felt like you had a lot of energy before you saw the ketone?
Yeah.
Or it's low today. Oh, I'm probably not going to have the energy to do what I wanted to do. It's almost like a replacement for the scale or scale obsession. So I had to back away from that. And now I test, like if I am doing something different with food, or if I am fasting, or if I'm doing something like that, I test to see. But I think when you, and yes, I do stay in ketosis all the time. But I think it's because for me, I experimented enough to know I need to be very low carb. Like 20 or less that's my deal. And I know some people can do more, and more power to them. Some people have to do less than me. But for me, I need to stay under 20. But moderating, like getting the protein and the fat ratios right for me, you know, that's a question. Like, how do you do that when you're not tracking? Well, intuitive eating is what you do. You cut back the protein portion, you add more fat. And if you are hungry again in 2 hours, you didn't have enough. And so the next time you eat, you say, well, I had this and this. I'm going to play around with portions. I'm going to add more fat. I'm going to trim this back or add a little bit more back. And then you start to, you have to find your own way. There's no two sets of people in the world that should eat the exact same things and expect to have the same results. And you have to be willing to experiment. I also think that's what keeps it exciting is figuring yourself out instead of being like, oh, why can't I just copy someone else's? Right, because that's how most people come to us, like people who help them with their diet. Like, can you give me a formula? Can you give me a food plan?
Oh my gosh, if I had one more person tell me they want a meal plan, I'm like, I don't give meal plans. I'm sorry, because I can't tell you exactly what to eat to make you be in ketosis.
Well, and honestly, like, even if you did say, well, here's a food plan, because there are people that do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that means nothing. You might have results with that. You might not. You may have better results if you weren't doing that. You know? Right. So our bodies are so individual that, to me, the experimentation and constant trying different things, like, I wonder what would happen if I did this. Or what if I wonder if I've been keto long enough that, because I am protein sensitive and some people are not as protein sensitive. I wonder if I've been keto long enough that I could add some protein and it won't affect my blood sugar. Mm-hmm. For me, no. Or if I did, for me, if I eat less fat, I can tell I get a little foggy. So that's just me. But then I have clients that are like a 1-1 ratio. They eat fat and protein equally. And that works for them. It just doesn't work for me. I highly encourage just experimentation.
Right. And I also think it's good to realize that what you're eating now that may not be what you're able to eat next week or next month or next year. So
Right.
if you are relying on the expert out there to give you a meal plan, and that's the only way you know how to eat, what's going to happen when that meal plan no longer works and things
Right.
start shifting and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? Like, I got to find somebody to make me a new meal plan. It's like, no,
Right.
just like you're saying, experiment with it, figure it out. Are you, do you do okay with a little more carbs? Maybe you need a little more carbs, maybe not. Maybe you need way less carbs, maybe
Yes.
the protein, maybe the fat, and like you said, I think that's I'll have people that will say, okay, well, how do I know if I'm eating enough fat? Like
You're
you
not
said,
hungry.
if you're hungry, you are not eating enough fat. Or they'll say, I'm having trouble getting more fat in. How's that even possible? Drizzle some stuff on your food.
It's so funny that the phrases that you're saying are so funny. I think the people that have problems getting fat in, they're thinking of fat as a separate thing. They're thinking of carbs, they're thinking of protein, and then they're thinking fat is this other thing, and I have to play catch up at the end of the day. And I'm like, no, there's 0 point in that. Fat is to fill you up. That's part of what helps with the eating disorder. The first time in your life you really feel satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to say, for every time I have a carbohydrate, for every time I have some protein, I say, how can I make these things vehicles for fat? And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, if I get my fat with it, I stay satisfied. I don't feel the need to have anything later. I don't feel the need to catch up on fat, It's because it really is pointless. And then there's that thought of, but I had extra protein, so now I need to add extra fat. No, you don't undo the protein by adding more fat, right? Like your ratios don't matter because you could balance them out just by overeating.
Right.
Right. Like if I want my carbs to be at 5%, and they're much higher than that, all I have to do is eat more other food and my percent goes down, but that's not what I need. It's not the answer.
Right. Exactly. So this has been really awesome. I just love everything that you had to say. And if anyone has listened to this, has watched this, and I'm sure they have, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, this girl she's exactly what I've been needing to hear. I want more. How do they find you? Where are you at? How can they get in contact with you? Give us all the goods.
At Instagram and Facebook, it's just at Coach Jessyca. My name is spelled with a Y. Mm-hmm. It's Coach Jessysca. And I usually have links. I've done quite a few podcasts now, which is really, really exciting. And I try to keep those on my pages so you can hear other things, because I find that each one takes a totally different turn. It's not the same story over and over. It's like we're talking about something completely different every single one. So if you want to hear more things like that, if you're interested in coaching, I do work for Keto Evangelist Coaching. You can find me there. It's ketoevangelistcoaching.com. But again, my mission in life is to let people know that no matter how bad you are, no matter how long you've been sick, you can get well. If I can, you can. There's nothing special about me that this worked for me. It's because literally it works.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Thank you so much for being on here.
Okay. Thank you again. It's so awesome to see your face.
This was